I think people are far more afraid of success than failure. I genuinely believe that like a lot of people, they want to do well, but they don't want to get to the edges, either edge, like greatness or failure. So being in the middle is fine. I think that your own lifestyle is challenging to people. Like you can, if you wish, move to a different country. I'm personally fascinated by that because to me that seems challenging. And so how do you create an organization that has that mindset of striving to become a little bit better, even when things are going really well?
This is Love Your Work, and I'm David Cadavy. How's it going? Like really, how are things going for you? If things are going pretty good, you might want to tear everything down and start all over again. Nick Kokonas is co-owner of the Alinea Group and CEO of Tock. The Alinea Group is a collection of restaurants Nick started with world-class chef Grant Achatz, including their first restaurant, Alinea, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant that received the James Beard Foundation Award for Outstanding Restaurant in 2016. Alinea is also ranked in the top restaurants in the US and the world on numerous lists, including World's 50 Best Restaurants. Tock, Nick's other company, is a reservation system for buying tickets to some of the best restaurants in the world. With Tock, Nick has completely rethought the economics of restaurants, eliminating wasted seating inventory and making available variable pricing based upon the popularity of reservation times. Nick is a truly original thinker. He's demonstrated this in his appearances on some other podcasts, including The Tim Ferriss Show and Noah Kagan Presents, a couple of my favorites, in fact. But this conversation is new. It is full of fresh insights, including, Nick says, people are far more afraid of success than failure. What drives Nick to tear everything down and start over even when things are going very well? Nick also says if you're trying to innovate, A/B testing things is a terrible idea because people don't know what they want. But there's an important distinction he draws. Find out when he tests and when he doesn't. And at Alinea, they intentionally make the first moments of dining there incredibly awkward. As Nick was telling this story, I was cringing. Nick said, there are people who hate us for it, and I'm okay with that. Find out why. Here's Nick Kokonas. Okay, it's great to be here in the Tock office with Nick Kokonas. And you and I were going back and forth on Twitter. We were talking about some fooled by randomness quotes that I was sharing, some highlights, passages. And it reminded me that I've heard you say before that Fooled by Randomness is perhaps your favorite book, or that you want your employees to read it.
Yeah, it's sort of the one that I recommend to people to get into a mindset of decision-making, I guess would be the right way to phrase it. It was really influential on me back when I was a trader, because a lot of what I had thought about how I approached every day, how I went in to make decisions and didn't rely on worry about outcomes as much as the process of making the decisions and things. And so there's definitely parts of the book. I've revisited it lately because a lot of people like yourself have sort of associated me suddenly with Taleb, and he's an interesting dude online. Like he's got really strong opinions about things. But that book in particular, I really just gravitate towards because it's economics, it's psychology, it's behavior, but it's done so in a way that's almost off-puttingly like basic, right? I mean, he's got his characters, he's pedantic,
Fat Tony,
all that stuff. Yeah. Those are the guys I grew up. I'm from Chicago. Mm-hmm. I grew up with a lot of Fat Tonys, and I learned from them.
And for people who are listening, Fat Tony,
he's the anti-academic dude who just knows shit and knows how to get it done. You know? I don't know how else to phrase it other than that. There's a lot of, I'm not anti-academic. I think we need all types, but the Fat Tonys of the world kind of just know things because they've experienced them thousands of times. I think that's the key. and they have all of our intuitive grasp of probability. Humans are really bad at that, right? Like we're just innately bad at probability and statistics. I actually think it's one of the most important classes I ever took in high school, right? You go back to like, what did I use from high school? And it's like probability and statistics are really, we're just bad at it. I'm sure there's some cognitive reason why, like while we were running away from lions, we didn't want to really know the probabilities of things or something. But at the end of the day, like if you have people estimate outcomes and probabilities, they do a terrible job of it. But the fat Tonys of the world kind of know that and they kind of take advantage of it, for lack of a better way of phrasing it.
So where did you see that as a trader?
Well, I mean, when you're a derivatives trader, you want to be making decisions like the house at the casino, right? So going to a basic game like blackjack, when you see someone who has 17 showing and the house has 15 showing and they hit because it feels right. I mean, you just don't ever. You never do that, right? Unless you're counting cards or some obscure thing. But like the same way, if you're a trader, like there's a lot of times where the probability is in your favor on a given trade. And you have to make that decision, even if the last 5 times it's gone against you. Because they are independent, assuming they're, of course, independent. I'm assuming they're independent outcomes. I just made a trade 5 minutes before you got here, actually. Mm-hmm. And I do not care whether it's outcome. I mean, I very much care. I want the outcome to be good emotionally, but was it the right trade? Yeah, it was the right trade. I made a trade. It was the right trade. Don't worry about the outcome. Like I'm not going to be emotionally invested in the outcome. And that's the part I love about that book is it's called Fooled by Randomness.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that we think are causal, but they're random. And and then we give ourselves credit for those. And then a lot of the opposite as well. I'll tell you the book I don't like, which is the opposite of this, is Outliers. I really don't like that book. I felt like that whole book was a data fit. It's like, yeah, like show me the people who spent 10,000 hours mastering something. And you need that dedication. It's not just a gift, right? So you have to work really hard at mastering something. But then there's also people who will, like if I swam for 10,000 hours, I would still suck at swimming. I'm just a shitty swimmer. And you need both. Like you need talent and dedication. And I just felt like everything in that book was a data fit. It's like,
maybe like a survivorship bias.
Oh, not maybe. I think it's 1,000% a survivorship bias. Like I know Nathan Myhrvold is in the book, and I know the guy. And
yeah,
he's a brilliant man.
So would it be a problem though, if the survivorship bias part of it was acknowledged and it was more like, here's what these people did, but also they were lucky? Or
I think it's somewhat lucky, somewhat just gifted. Like, we hate to say nowadays that somebody like Michael Phelps probably has feet that look like flippers. Mm-hmm. He's just, that helps, right? In the swimming thing. I do not. Therefore, I could spend 40,000 hours. I'm still not going to be as fast as Michael Phelps. And I think we all know that. And that's fine. It's just the way things are. Like we all have our skills. It was a random answer to a random book, but it's a real thing that like people just don't look at that. They look at the outcomes and then they go like, I'm going to do that same thing again.
Yeah.
But what I always try to tell my employees is that sometimes you make a bad decision and it has a good outcome and you can't feel good about that. And vice versa.
That's very difficult to do.
Yes. And that means that you have to also reflect on the decision, what the outcome. I mean, a lot of times you can't tell, right? You don't know if you were smart or lucky.
Yeah. Well, today I had to make the decision whether or not to bring an umbrella with me. And I looked at dark sky and it said no rain, but the forecast had said rain. And I didn't have any room in my bag for an umbrella. And I decided not to bring in an umbrella. And then it rained. Yes. And I'm still like, I don't know. Did I make a good decision or not? Well, the outcome was bad-ish.
Yeah, but
but it still might be worth it.
Right. And it's low impact. So it's like you're not
Yeah.
going to dwell on that at all.
I'm not going to melt.
Right. But I think that we're talking about a business context here. Like for me, the process of learning how to try to disassociate myself between the decision-making process, then put up a wall and then be like, and here are all the outcomes. And for something like A/B testing, advertising or something like that, it's really easy to do that, right? Because you've got like, hey, we're going to decide to run all these ads. And we have statistics. There's a sample of hundreds of thousands of impressions, maybe. So that's pretty easy to pick a winner, But in your life, I watch a lot of people drag themselves down about, whether it be a decision to go to a university or study this or that, or take this job or that job. There's a lot of times where we hire someone where 2 weeks in, I'm like, I don't think this person's going to work out. Like it was a bad decision. But it wasn't just my bad decision. Like I don't feel that bad about it because even though I offered them a job, it was also their decision to choose to apply and work here.
Mm-hmm.
So there was 2 people, dancing the tango there. And it's really hard to get in the mindset of making those tough decisions when people's emotions are involved, and their lives. I mean, that's a big deal.
I'm glad you mentioned A/B testing because that's something that I've long been kind of skeptical or critical of in some ways, mostly because you don't always get that type of data, and the data that you get in an A/B test isn't necessarily helping you drive the decisions that I'm usually looking for, which are those decisions that are this 0 to 1 thing.
Yeah. So I would say that like if you're trying to innovate, A/B testing things is a terrible idea because people won't know what they want. So there are things that we A, B, C, D, E, F test, like advertising and marketing, which I think are a little bit different than, or even some UX stuff, like should the button be on the left or the right, where aesthetically it's the same, functionally it's the same. But if you put it on the left half of the page, people click it 14% more times a million people, right? So that's not really about innovation. It's just about like, well, we need a button and the button's going to go somewhere. If I A/B tested starting Tock, 1,000 out of 1,000 restaurant owners would have said it was a terrible idea. I mean, Danny Meyer told me it was a terrible idea when he heard that I was selling tickets to my restaurant in 2010. And we're going to cross about, he said, you'll never sell a ticket to a restaurant. And we're about to cross $650 million in tickets sold to restaurant and doing about $400 million a year. So if I A/B tested that, it would have been everyone would say I didn't need it. But where to put the buy button, that's testable.
Yeah.
Different things.
Well, and there's some of these qualitative things where you get the feedback from somebody, I hate it. And more often lately, I hear that and I'm thinking,
it might be a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, whenever you see a politician that's like, we're in debate season and whatnot, and you can see who is over programmed and who knows exactly what their constituency thinks of this word versus that word, because you can feel the programming in a human.
You can see the calculation happening in their facial expressions.
That's right. And so that's
off-putting.
Yeah, that's a terrible use of doing that. But if that same candidate was to take 10 of their sound clips and put them on to Facebook and see which one got them the most donations, that's something that's testable. 2 different things. Authenticity is the scarce resource, right? And so what we're really arguing is what parts do you ignore or that you don't even bother testing because you know authentically that it's better.
But even with the testing scenario that you just mentioned, wouldn't you have to be very careful to get a sense of, well, that maybe this one thing really resonates with this particular group of people, but across the population, it's not performing well.
Right.
What does that mean?
Yeah, because of course you always have to figure out your segmentation and all. Like, I'll give you a more concrete example that's easy to do. Like, we're selling books. Like, I have books that we self-publish. We would like to sell them. And because we've self-published and we're doing a direct-to-consumer model, we have enough money and enough margin in every book that we can actually advertise the books all the time online. And so we have a talented couple, Alan and Sarah Hemberger. Anything we can think up for an ad. He worked at Pixar in 3D animation. It doesn't even need to exist in the world. I could have spaceships dropping books out of the sky or whatever in 10 minutes. So we got really creative and started doing all these different ads where a beautiful cocktail would be, it's a cocktail book. So it'd be a beautiful cocktail and it would slosh around and then it would say, like, buy the aviary book and click this button. Sarah made this Rube Goldberg like machine that was pumping out books. It was really cool. We thought it was really fun. Probably took her 100 hours to make. Nobody knew that we were selling a book with any of those. Like, those performed terribly. The one that was a movie of someone just flipping through this giant book so that they could see like 30 pages performed like 20 times better than all of our creative ads. Why? In hindsight, the reason we think is everyone else was like, well, that's a cocktail. So you click on that. It's like saying what you're actually doing matters. So we got so caught up in our own creativity of trying to come up with clever ads or cool ads or something that would stop you on Instagram after looking at it for half a second, when all anybody really ever needed there was just a book and someone flipping through it. That's universal. We've all done it. That's kind of the only ad we run anymore. It's so much better than all the other ones. But weirdly, I would never have found that out if we didn't actually test it.
Right.
So now I'm an advocate for going like, well, if you're selling something, just say what it is that you're selling. Be very clear about it.
And that seems like it works in a well-defined context. But if you're thinking of something like, how are we going to make a cohesive vision or philosophy that's expressed in, say, a restaurant experience? Where do you draw the line there as far as where to test and not test and where to trust your feedback and not?
For me personally, it's about wanting to start with the emotion that you want to create with someone when you're creating an experience. So let's take it away from the restaurant and go like, how would you make a doctor's office better? Like, we all know the experience of, I'm kind of obsessed with this lately because you walk into a doctor's office and there are people behind a desk, sometimes with that little glass partition, and they've got a clipboard of stuff you need to fill out, That's the common experience. And it's not a great one. Like, if you think about it, I can't think of a worse way to go in and about to get, whatever, a pint of blood taken or, tested in some way that's uncomfortable. How would you go, like, what kind of emotion do you want to create? Like, if you're going to a doctor's office, and if you start there, comfort, you want trust, like there's so many different emotions that you might want to engender if you're that doctor, and then design the office around that. And there's so many things you can steal from. You can steal from movies and plays and theme park rides or, whatever it may be. But that's not so hard to test in the sense of what is the person feeling? And that's what we do with our restaurants. Like, when we do a course, we're kind of like, not just the taste is almost the tool to get to the feeling.
And when it comes to that experience, I think what happens is that it's being viewed from a transactional lens, that we need to get this data from the person. What's a way to get the data from the person?
Right.
You put a form in front of them. Maybe there's something similar like that with, say, a restaurant experience where, okay, we need to get people into tables. And so we have this maitre d' station.
One of the things, the stories we always tell is when we started building Alinea, we were like, what could be less welcoming than walking into a restaurant and going up to a podium where there's a computer that you can't see your name and what's your name and do you have a reservation? Like
that moment when they're looking at it and they're like, you can see their facial expression,
Yes.
and you're playing in your head. They're going to tell me that
right.
that they don't have it. I just
They don't
know.
have it, or go to the bar and wait for 20 minutes, or they're looking over their shoulder at the manager going, do we give them the good table or the shitty table? Like, you know, I mean, of course that's what's happening. We all know that's what's happening. It's amazing to me that most restaurants don't acknowledge that and try to fix it in some way. And I blame the culture of the restaurants. Like, there's most chefs and restaurant owners I know think if they have great food and great service, everything else is a given. You know, great food and great service, you know, build it and they will come, for those who are old enough to remember Field of Dreams, right? I realize I can't use that analogy for a lot of my employees. They're like, what movie is that? So officially old.
Well, people still know Show Me the Money and they haven't seen
that's right. Yes. That's become memed though. I don't think Build It, They Will Come has been memed. But, and then they forget about all these other little things, you know, and that there could be an easy, different way to greet people at a restaurant. And even my own restaurants fall into that. Like, it's when you have 300 people coming into a restaurant, it's very different than when you have 60. With 60, we can design a different experience. With 300, it's kind of like a check you in process. As
you were mentioning this experience of being at the Maitre D kiosk, it reminded me of a time where I heard you say something about intentionally creating some kind of feeling of discomfort before the dining experience. Can you talk about that and contrast those?
Yeah, it was when we were building Alinea back in 2005. We were asking just this very question: how do you make someone, like, I'll ask you, what's the warmest welcome you've ever gotten somewhere? It's hard to remember, right? Like, you must have gone to someone's home sometime and been like, man, this is nice. Like, these people are great.
Yeah.
Like, you know, or like you just met someone and they invite you in and it's just a warm friendship from the start. Yeah. Right. And that's the feeling we wanted to, or the kind of feelings we wanted to get to at a restaurant. And, you know, I remember, are you familiar with El Bulli, the restaurant, Front Adria? Right. So for those who aren't, it was named the number one restaurant in the world a number of times, and Front Adria is kind of the father of molecular gastronomy and this sciencey kind of cooking. 20-course tasting menus. It was in Roses, Spain, way outside of Barcelona. And I had in my head, because I'd read all about it, that this was going to be a very formal sort of like, you know, a fine dining experience, because it was the best restaurant in the world. And Franz, you know, they make him out like Picasso or Dali, like he's this crazy genius. And you have to drive like an hour and a half out of your way to this like little seaside town, and you get in and they put you outside near the sea, and it's a bodega, and then they serve you like just the most delicious little tapas you've ever had. Now, of course, they're all perfect and they're all done with like crazy technique and all that. But all of a sudden I went, oh my God, it's just a tapas restaurant. And it was so warm. Like, the greeting was so warm, and no one ever, like, you go look up El Bulli reviews. No one ever really talks about like the fact that it was casual. There's people there in jeans and a t-shirt with their family who they lived in Barcelona. And this was like, they've been going there for 15 years, you know? Mm-hmm. And I immediately went, oh, this place is great. Not solely because of like this great technique and the army of chefs and the food, but because all that completely disappears when you sit down. No one's shoving that in your face. They're shoving a very kind of Spanish, awesome hospitality that is of its place. It's just the reason that there's 20 courses is it's tapas. They're tiny little bites, just like you'd get in San Sebastian when you go on Paseo, you know? So similarly, we were trying to think, what do you do to get that? And what we ended up coming up with was, hey, you got to drive an hour to get there, kind of thing. If you watch a movie, they don't just hit you with the feel good moment. You got to create a little tension first, right? I mean, that's
the hero needs to be,
you got to have the journey for the hero
over the edge of the building, being hung by the villain,
right?
At some point,
yes,
the all is lost moment.
Yeah, and so we came to like, well, we can't really do do that in the middle of Chicago, but what if when you opened the door, nobody said hello? And you had like a 30-foot long hallway that went from really tall and really wide to like a faux perspective. So like when you go to Colgate, the first thing they used to teach you is there's this Gen Ed 101 on the history of like Western thought. And I remember we studied Chartres Cathedral, and, back with, the first flying buttresses and all. I mean, I still remember all this stuff, but the coolest thing to me, and the biggest trick there, is that when you walk in a cathedral in Europe, doors are actually smaller than normal. Like some of them have giant doors, but some of them have like tiny little doors that are barely taller than you are. And you open that door, and then all of a sudden the ceiling is 300 feet tall. And so it accentuates how small you feel in the face of God, kind of thing. Like that was very intentional with the architecture. And what we kind of wanted to do is the opposite. We wanted you to like go down this hallway and be forced to come into our restaurant single file and not quite know where the door was. And just a little bit of like, this is weird or cool or different, kind of going like down a funhouse hallway, and then these doors would open up to the left, and we would already know that you're coming because there's a little sensor in there that tipped off the coat stand kind of thing. And we only had one table booked every 15 minutes. And so we probably could guess that you were this party or that party. And we would greet you by name, and there was no host stand, and someone would just walk up to you, and you've already gone this little miniature weird journey down this hallway. Now we got rid of that in 2016 because the internet ruined that for everybody, as is the case with so many things.
Because people explained it in their reviews.
Oh yeah. I mean, the first person to come in walked the wrong way, which was awesome. It's what we wanted. The 18,000th person that year had already read about it on the internet, and wasn't terribly surprised, and people are posing for pictures and movies in the hallway and all that. So it loses its purpose. And so now we do something completely different when you arrive. I don't want to say what that is, because I don't want to ruin it.
People will find out.
Right. But we do it very differently. And still we had a group of people last week come in and sit down, and they were so angry right away. I mean, and we set it up so that, okay, here, I'm going to just say it, because for those of you who aren't coming to Alinea, if you want to be surprised, spoiler alert coming, we basically sit everybody at a communal table when you arrive, 18 people at a communal table now. If you spend $500 a person, you're about to get engaged that night. The last thing you want is the Jones family from Columbus, Ohio, sitting next to you at this giant table, and you being so far away from your loved one across the table. The table's really wide. It's like 6 feet, 7 feet wide. Yeah. So it's like a David Byrne thing. Like you can't even like chat with your own person. You're forced to talk to these other people.
Yeah.
That doesn't last long. And I don't want to ruin it. So there is more to it, but that doesn't last long. And very quickly you get your own table in the very same room in a way that's unexpected. And nothing could make your own table feel more special than thinking 10 minutes earlier that you weren't ever going to get one.
Yeah.
And that this whole thing is just a catastrophe, and you can't believe you flew all the way to Alinea. We had Rory McIlroy in for his 30th birthday. I'm a golfer. So
me too.
Erica McIlroy, his wife, emailed me through mutual friends, said his 30th birthday is coming up. We're going to be nearby Chicago. We're going to make a side trip to come in. And they arrived, and they got to this communal table, and they were sitting next to like a 12-year-old kid, and Rory was over the other side of the table so far that they couldn't even really talk to each other. And they both got they weren't going to say anything to me. Right. And I wasn't there. I didn't intrude on their celebration or anything like that. And, out of context, I think a lot of people have no idea who Rory McIlroy is. He looks like a pretty ordinary Irishman. And, afterwards I met them after their experience for a drink, and they both said to me, "You cheeky bastard." We were so mad that we flew into Chicago and we couldn't even talk to each other. And I had this 12-year-old kid tugging on my sleeve going, "What do you think's in this dish?" And as soon as we got our own table, we just giggled like school kids and went, "They got us good." Now, I think a lot of restaurants would making that first moment that awkward. No one would want to do that. And by the way, there are people who hate us for it. and I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm thinking, yeah,
Right.
this is pretty
Yeah.
sinister. I mean,
Yeah, but it's fun. At the end of the day, most people, not all, but most, like 95%, know that it was purposeful and fun. And then they also feel a sense of community with everyone else who had in the room. So suddenly you have this communal experience that you wouldn't normally have in a fine dining restaurant where everyone around you is in that great spot. That gets me back to the LBE thing. Like when you're sitting out there by the sea and they're serving you little caprañas, nitro, and all that, and some delicious food. You look at the other people there and you're just like, I am the luckiest bastard alive right now. This is really special. When we get there, we just don't have the sea or anything else, So that's the feeling you want to create. But sometimes you have to take a little bit of a journey to get there.
Yeah. So when it's intentional and when you're crafting it, it's far different from simply having a lack of attention to detail or a lack of mindfulness of the experience.
Well, and you can't, this is getting back to the ABC test thing. It's not like we tried 3 different methods of doing this with the new Alinea. Like we gutted the whole place and built it around these kind of things, hoping that we had learned enough about human nature to make it work. But there wasn't anyone else that had done it in a restaurant the way we're trying to do it.
This is that space that Seth Godin often talks about. This might not work.
Yes. Or we exist in that an awful lot. And then when, there are times when we set something up and it's just really self-evident quickly that it does not work. And then we change. Like
Can you tell us about a time that happened?
Sure. I mean, we just recently opened the St. Clair Supper Club in the basement of Royster. And when we did that because the basement of Royster as the basement of Royster did not work. It was an abject failure. So when we were building Royster, we thought, hey, we're going to have this great experience upstairs. That's Royster is like literally means to like party into the middle of the night. And it's going to be loud and boisterous and fun and casual. And we're going to do great food and everyone's going to be able to see the kitchen. And then in the basement, we'll do the very same food, but we'll do it in a more staid, calm, quiet environment. And we built a beautiful kitchen down there and we called it the prep kitchen. And, that'd be a cool, intimate experience. And everyone who came, almost everyone, sort of 1090 the other way, the wrong way, went, I don't want to be down here. I want to be upstairs where the party's at. Why'd you shove me in the basement? It felt like a lesser experience than the thing just above it that they had to walk through to get down there. And so there were a few people who were like, oh, I like eating down there because the food's the same and it's nice and quiet. But for the most part, it just didn't work. And then we tried to do some tasting menus down there, creating a slightly different experience. And the very same thing. People would literally say like, hey, can I get that same thing from down there upstairs? Because that's where it seems nicer. It doesn't seem like I'm crammed in a basement. So we literally shut it for 7 months while we were trying to figure out what to do. Now, imagine you've spent, that's probably an $800,000 build originally down there just with HVAC and kitchen and all that stuff. And no one wanted to dine there. So I consider that, a temporary failure, right? I mean, but a lot of people in our company were like, well, we still do like, 30 people at night down there and that's real revenue and all that. I'm like, yeah, it's just not a great experience. Let's just shut it.
Yeah.
Let's just shut it and figure something else out. So it took us a while and we came up with this new concept, St. Clair Supper Club, which is a Midwest supper club. And a lot of those had the wood paneled walls and all that stuff. And hey, you know what? It's not weird to be in a basement if it embraces the basementness of it. And now it's 80 people a night at a higher check average than upstairs and everyone loves it. And it's reviewed as a totally separate restaurant. It has its own website and people feel like they're going somewhere special instead of down to a basement.
It makes me feel like, gosh, I have it so good when I can make a podcast episode or an article and I can take a risk. And if it doesn't go well, it's like, well, there went, a couple hours of my time or something. I didn't have to build an entire experience and have it.
It was hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of temporarily wasted money. But now, we redid it. We reinvested in it. We have a great experience. But again, before we opened that, we didn't really know if it was going to work. And it's working great. I mean, I love it down there.
But you have to arrive at this point where maybe you don't have to, but it's probably ideal to arrive at this point where you have enough experience seeing that over and over again. How do people react to a space and an experience so that you can have some kind of cohesive enough vision that
Yeah, but
you
part
have
of
an
it's
idea of what risks to take.
part of it's also about willing to pull the plug when you have a loser. Like one of the things that Fooled
Yeah.
by Randomness in every trading book ever will tell you that, like, if you buy XYZ stock at 100 and it goes to 80, it's not cheaper. It's not on sale. It is what it is. Like, you're down $20, but would you buy it at 80 today, independent of your previous decision and position? And so similarly, no one in my company wanted to concede defeat on
Sunk
our
cost
original
bias.
Yes. And it's like, 1,000%, I was going, hey guys, Royster upstairs is awesome. The basement clearly isn't. So why are we doing half measures? Like, let's just get rid of it and redo it. Think of something totally new. That's really hard to do. And it's hard to do when things are going like, okay. You can't just do it when it's a disaster. It's easy to do. When things are going middlingly, it's really hard to make the decision to like scrap it and start over.
Yeah, I mean, especially because sunk cost bias, I've been thinking is, in some ways, it's overblown because it's not just the cost that you've sunk, it's the cost of changing that's in the equation too.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I guess you could just shut it and do nothing too. That's a third option.
Yeah.
You don't like have to keep going on it. But, the best operators in anything are the ones that are constantly killing off their offspring.
Yeah.
Like the bad offspring have to die. It's a morbid thought, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I like what you say about how it's difficult to change when it's doing middlingly. Like when you're in, I think as Taleb would call it, mediocre stand, which isn't supposed to sound as derogatory as it is, but it's just this area, in which I think probably most restaurants that remain in business operate, where it's like, oh, you hear this thing that restaurants only make so much of a margin, but you want to be an extremist stand.
Yeah. I mean, literally, I was talking to a restaurant owner the other day. We have about 2,500 restaurants on Tock now and adding about 6 new ones a day. And a lot of those want to talk to me. And the guy had this attitude of like, hey man, like, we've got 14 restaurants. We brought 13.4% to the bottom line last year. And so I just don't want to screw anything up.
Because 13.4% is pretty good in the restaurant industry.
That's what he's read.
Yeah.
And so he believes that, and he believes his own press.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what if you could get to 20%? That means you're actually failing by almost half of your margin you can improve by. And he was like, well, I don't think that's possible. And I said, well, last month I did 28.3% fine dining. I'll show you my books. I'll show you my K1 if you want. Like my tax returns, I'll show to like a business owner. Like, I don't care. Like, if you don't believe me, I'll prove it. And that's a very Taleb thing too. It's like, hey, screw you. Like, here you go. Here's the proof. The proof is legit. I think it's one of the reasons why, we have so many political issues over the tax returns now. Like, if you're such a freaking genius, show us. It's pretty simple. So I had that conversation, and what was fascinating is how much this guy wanted to dig in on that and thought I was just bragging. And I'm like, no, I'm not bragging. Like, I want to share something that I've learned with you. And I don't want anything. You don't have to sign up for Tock. I don't want anything in return other than to show you that you're living in the middle.
You're living in a mediocre stand.
You're living there. But I think that in general, so I think people are far more afraid of success than failure. Like, when you fail at something or are in the middle on something, you have a lot of company. And you can feel good about it. You can commiserate about it. You can say, well, I'm doing really great, Then if you suddenly, like, if everything starts going really well, your life, it's like the Seinfeld episode where suddenly he asks his girlfriend if she wants to have a threesome and she's totally into it. I think George, remember, it's like, holy, I need a new couch now because I can't have a shitty couch if I'm that guy. It's like, it's just crazy. Like, if things go too well, like, your whole life has to change. And I genuinely believe that like a lot of people that I sort of mentor or boards I'm on or whatever, they don't really want to do, they want to do well, but they don't want to get to the edges, either edge, like greatness or failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so being in the middle is fine. And I think that your own lifestyle is challenging to people. Like, you know, it's like you can, if you wish, move to a different country. That's like I asked you about that before we got on the air here. And like, I'm personally fascinated by that because to me, that seems challenging.
Which is part of the reason why I do it.
Right. And so I look at that not as a threat to me, but as a way of
the fascination part, not so much just the challenging part, by the way, just to clarify that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it like, wow, okay, that's here's a person that has chosen to do that and is making it work and is happy about it. And by the way, if you weren't, because you've done that, you now know that you can undo it. It's not just like my basement. Like I can undo the basement. It's not that hard.
Not that I would admit if I was unhappy.
You might.
It would just,
but it's
cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
It is. It's a big thing. And so, how do you create an organization that has that mindset of striving to become a little bit better, even when things are going really well? Like I'm walking around. We have had 3 record months in a row with our restaurant group. And I literally just this morning walked up to one of my key employees who works on the business side of things. And I'm trying to create problems right now because I'm like, this can't last. This is unusual. We're at like the 3rd standard deviation of crazy business. Start planning for the flood because something's coming. And I hope it doesn't, right? But man, like when things are going well, I get really nervous because I want us to keep striving, keep getting better.
You don't want to become complacent.
Yes. I mean, it's so when you're doing something new, it's exciting because you don't know the outcome, right? That's the anticipation of things. And as you get older and more successful, even if you're in that middle mediocrity, you're making 14% on your restaurant empire. It's a known, like next month is the same as this month. Mm-hmm. It's a known outcome. You're going to win. Like it's kind of boring. Like who wants to play a game of checkers against a 5-year-old and know you're going to win every time? It's just not fun. In
the parlance of Tyler Cowen, it would be stagnation versus dynamism.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but it's great to read about that or hear some dude talk about it. It's much harder to walk in at 9 a.m. on a Monday and go, okay, guys, like shit's going really well right now. What are we gonna start or mess up or break so we can do it over again? And that you have to approach things like that becomes fun. Like that's just part of your ethos.
That's skin in the game. That's, you're demonstrating to this other business owner, showing them your books. Though I would say that, well, what about the survivorship bias thing too?
Yeah. I mean, I could just be exceptionally lucky.
Other people who did stuff exactly what you did and they're on the street now. Right?
Yeah. I mean, the cool part is that, and that, by the way, like 4 or 5 years ago when we were starting Tock and I would show it to people, that was their reaction was like, oh, well, you got away with that. We can't get away with that. Now, I've got thousands of restaurants and millions of diners seated every month. So now I can start going like, well, actually, we've got enough data that this works, this does not work, this can improve, this is when you should do this or when you shouldn't.
Now they can do it. But I mean, there's no way to know without making copies of the universe that you could do the same things that you have done and end up in the same place, which is fine. That's not to, it's just that it's like when people ask me about becoming a writer or something and I give them some advice, like, I can't do that. I'm like, yeah, I know it's super scary to do these things and, you might not make it.
I will say that the scariest thing I've ever done is write Grant's memoir because I love books.
Oh, yeah.
And I fancied myself, let me just rephrase. Everyone fancies themselves a writer to some extent. Like everyone thinks they're a good storyteller. And so, it's the only time we signed a contract for a book. I'm a big believer of self-publishing, owning your IP, all that sort of stuff. But for this one, I needed to have a real deadline, and I needed a giant chunk of responsibility and money associated with that to force me to sit down to write it, because I was so scared to do it. And man, that was a sufficient motivator. And B, it was just a painful process. It's really hard to write well.
I experienced the same thing with my first book, because I actually didn't fancy myself a writer. And
well, you must have a little, because you chose to write it.
I just wanted to prove myself, I guess. I wanted to do something. Yeah. And that opportunity came around. Yeah. And this was like, that's the thing. But now I can do the deadline and all that stuff, because now my personal identity is that I can get up and I can do it, and I can be confident that I'll make it. I like what I guess I wanted to go into this idea of average, or what the average restaurant is doing. And it's the thing that you always hear people say, oh, the restaurant business is terrible. It's low margins, but you can try to walk across a lake that's got an average depth of 3 feet.
It might be one hole that's 4,000 feet deep, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. So when I got down to the floor of the Mercantile Exchange as a trader, what they used to say was that 1 out of 100 people make it a year. And out of those surviving people, 1 out of 100 make $1 million. So it's a terrible business to get into if you want to make money. But it's kind of like saying, like, son, if you want to make it to the NFL
mm-hmm.
and you're a high school football player, the chances are you're not going to make it. And yeah, that's true. But the flip side of that is that if you do, like, you've got a giant moat around you. Like, I went and with the NFL, like, you need a certain amount of physical prowess and gifts and whatnot. I'm not so sure you need that to be a great writer or to be like a great trader, or like, these are things that normal quote unquote people can train themselves at. And the restaurant business is certainly one of those. I looked at it, and when people say, like, 90% of the restaurants that open fail within the first 3 years. I had a restaurant owner when I started building Alinea say to me, like, the guy owned 5 restaurants, and I thought, like, I liked him. I said, yeah, I'm quitting what I'm doing. And I was making a bunch of money at the time. I'm going to go build a restaurant. And he said, Jesus, why would you ever do that? This is a terrible business. And I said, well, I noticed you just opened your 5th one. Like, why would you open more if the other 4 were losing money? Because you like losing money? Like,
yeah,
everyone likes to complain about their jobs. It's like there's doctors doctoring is a terrible business right now, because of the insurance companies and this and that. And yet, the guy's living in a $2 million house and driving a Porsche. It's not that bad. So you got to let the evidence kind of speak for itself. And the fact is that any business that you're going to start as an owner and an entrepreneur is hard. It's just, no matter what it is. But is it doable, and are the rewards worth it? And, for me, the answer was, absolutely.
Maybe part of it is that people don't want to give advice. When you give advice to somebody, they're probably apt to evaluate the outcome rather than the quality of the advice.
And I also think that people think that they don't want to create their own competition. Like, even if they don't admit that to themselves, I mean, not everyone's walking around maliciously going, don't get into the restaurant business because it's a terrible business, because they don't want you to open up down the street. But I think there's a little bit of human nature to that. Like, why create my own competition? That's never really bothered me.
Have you created your own competition?
I help all sorts. Like, there's tons of, some of the guys. So I've done both. I've tried to squash competition. who are competing directly with me, who I might like the people personally a lot, but like, I don't, better off if they're for me if they're not there. But I will say that with a smile on my face to their face. And I also help a lot of folks as well. So if people come and go like, hey, I've been wanting to do this my whole life, and will you read my business plan? I get a lot of those, and I'm happy to help, with my time as much as I can.
Is it a struggle to think dispassionately in those situations where you shouldn't be helping your competition logically, but you are?
I think it's the other way around. I think there's sometimes where I'm just like, I just don't like this person very much, and so I don't want to help them. And that's just a bad thing to say, I guess. But I mean, it's human nature.
Do you ever find then that you end up helping them anyway, and then you start to like them?
I was going to say no, but that would sound terrible. I'm thinking of like two particular instances. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely been cases where I feel like I'd say this. There are times when I've helped some people that I like a lot, and they're doing really well, and I'm really psyched for them. There are times where I've spent a lot of time helping someone, they're doing well, and then you never hear from them again once they're up and going, kind of thing. That bothers me more than any of the other potential outcomes, because it's just kind of like, I know who helped me out when I was starting out, and I will always give credit to those people that took of their time and had some faith in me and whatnot. The opposite of that is, it's like you help someone and then all of a sudden they're doing well and they disappear. I mean, everyone knows that story. There's been a lot of movies and books written about that. So, I like, at this point in my career, like, it's what you do,
mm-hmm.
And then even with our peer group, like I had a CEO of a restaurant group, very famous restaurant group in here, spending 3 days just going through some of our processes to see what we could learn from each other. And I was very open. Like, they were shocked at how open I was. And I was just like, well, why wouldn't I show this to you? Like, you're on the other end of the country anyway, too. Like, and they're like, well, we have all the same clientele. And I was like, yeah, so what? Like, it's not going to hurt me at all to do this. And weirdly, they were very guarded with all of their info.
Uh-huh.
So it didn't become reciprocal at all.
I get the same reaction about putting an income report up. Why would you do that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like,
because it helps me think more rigorously about the decisions I'm making.
The thing that I've written that's been read almost more than anything else is the Aviary book blog, why we're self-publishing, where I showed the contracts, the cost of production, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And tons of people have said to me, like, why would you tell everybody that? I said, well, I can't make an infinite number of books. Like, my books, are selling well. Like, I hope everyone else who wants to do this goes and writes their own cookbook. And we've sold nearly $4 million that book within 10 months. It's a great business. Let me just tell you, there was just an article in the New York Times, which I don't dislike the author, but I hated the article. Basically saying, like, hey, the cookbook industry sucks and you'll never make any money in it. And then they interviewed me for it. And I was like, well, no, it doesn't have to. But they didn't really like point to the reasons why I was saying that. And then, I was practicing what I preached. It wasn't empty. Like, it's, people don't realize that publishers still make tons of money. It's not what it was 20 years ago. But there's tons of money being made.
That real estate in Manhattan is not
right. It's not
cheap.
free. It's not free. And the all the agents are making 15% on something.
It's that average.
Yeah.
It's how the lake is an average of 2 feet deep. Or one I thought about recently was this factoid that 90% of people think that they're above average drivers. And that's supposed to make us think, well, people are fools. Well, I mean, they probably are, but it's also possible for 90% of people to be above average drivers.
That's correct. Because 10% are freaking dismal. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And I think but you have to be.
But that gets back to the sort of the mathematical literacy that we were talking about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
people don't understand statistics, right? So that's a perfect example of something that can be true and misleading at the same time.
What they mean to say is, 90% of drivers think they're better than the median, but
Yes.
it doesn't have the same ring to it.
No, it does not. And and by the way, they're just there to sell that click.
Right.
So that's the other problem now, right?
And people don't think about that when they're reading something. What's the motivation here?
Yeah, 1,000%.
So when you write about, like when you wrote about publishing the Alinea cookbook, does the process of writing that improve your thinking, or is it simply sharing thoughts that you have already had?
I think it's both. It certainly helps me to be more rigorous in my data collection, because once you're going to hit that button and a few 100,000 people are going to read it, you can damn well be sure that if you screwed up some of your math or your data collection, someone's out there is going to point it out, which I like. So that keeps you honest. Usually by the time I sit down and write, I've been writing it in my head for like 8 months. So I tend to walk around with this dialogue going in my head about, like I'm about to write an article called The Power of a Single Table.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it's the basic premise is that if you sell a single table in your restaurant, let's say your restaurant has 40 tables. If you take one and make it really special and pre-sell it, that'll be your entire profit for the following year. So last year, the aviary kitchen table inside of our bar did $392,000 in sales. One table, 1 4-top, tiny little table. It's a lot. That's as much as some small restaurants in Chicago for the whole year. The margin on that table, because it's just an added experience, is huge. Like there's no more, I didn't add labor, I didn't add rent, I didn't add insurance. I just put in a single table and I pre-sold a really special experience. Once you do that, it's great. But that's not the point. The point is, I've been writing this article in the right way to phrase it for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And our marketing team here came to me the other day and said, we're about to launch an event-based product for Tock that will allow people to sell a single table. That'd be a good time to put out that article. It's not why I started writing it, but it'd be a good marketing thing for that. And they said, Nick, when, are you writing that thing? I said, oh, yeah. They said, well, let me read it. And they think I'm like schizophrenic or something. I'm like, oh, I've got it written. I can burp it out for you if you like. But when I say I have it written, I mean, I can almost recite the whole thing. And then when I sit down and write, it's 15 minutes for 2,000 words. But I've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. Like, what is the shortest number of words, the smallest number of words that I can get this out? And what is my point really trying to make? And who's reading it? And why? And will this do any good to that doctor's office instead of a restaurant? How can I abstract it so it's not just about me and this place, but more generally useful?
Yeah.
To me, that's really the crux of the matter.
I mean, it's impressive that you can think about it in that much detail without the training wheels of writing it down.
Yeah, I guess.
Which
or
is
the training wheels falling off. Right?
I mean, I need to write it down to think it.
I almost feel like if I forget it, it wasn't worth having. So like if I wake up in the morning and I keep thinking about it, it's probably a good idea. If I forget it, I'm just thinking, well, it must not have been so good. I was a philosophy major in college. So my professor always used to just drill me on getting things concise and short. And what's your point actually? He used to always say that to me and I was annoyed. Like, okay, I've read this. What's your point actually? I'm like, well, you assigned a damn paper.
I think that you and I share a sort of personality type that I think that a lot of my listeners have as well, which people will say it's pseudoscience, but the perceiver on the Myers-Briggs, the perceiver versus judger, fox rather than
I don't really know much. I don't know anything about that.
Okay. So it's just, well, then we can...
I've heard of the Myers-Briggs, but I really don't know anything about it.
So low psychological need for closure. I've heard you say that you're an inch deep and a mile wide.
Yeah.
And I've heard other people who are J's instead of P's who are an inch wide and a mile deep. And I'm like that inch deep mile wide. I'm realizing a lot of my listeners and readers are that way. And it can be a debilitating personality type to have, because you can start to beat yourself up because you think you're not making any progress on anything. Is that anything that you are aware of about yourself? And do you do anything to mitigate the cons of that personality? And if I'm correct,
Boy, my wife would say I'm doing nothing to mitigate the cons of that personality. No, I agree. You're not incorrect. You are correct. I do not. I don't know. It's just I've always been interested in a lot of different stuff. What took me a long time is to find the utility in that. So I think that when you're younger, people force you to try to go miles deep, right? Now, there's a couple things that I'm kind of deep in, and I had to get deep in, but for the most part, I still have this broad set of interests. And we were working on some logos the other day for a new restaurant we're going to open, and I start pulling in references from all sorts of different stuff and architecture and, period font design and weird stuff. And you could see that the designers in the room from this other company were kind of looking at me going like, what the hell does he know about it? It was almost annoying to them that I knew any of that, because it actually made their job harder. They couldn't just throw some stuff at me and it was going to be
as
fine.
A former designer, that does sound like a nightmare client.
Right,
yeah.
For sure. And I if it wasn't going to lead to a better outcome, I would just shut up. Like, I'm not trying to do the design. I give them a lot of latitude. Like, they're artists and they should be artists, and let them do their art. At the same time, don't give me shit and expect me to praise you for it when you just knocked it off of some thing from a 1962 Volkswagen ad. Like, I know that ad. So that's useful. And yeah, you need the people that are, you have to surround yourself then with people who are inch wide, mile deep. Some Grant Achatz, like, I can't do anything I do in a restaurant without having great cooks. And he will be the first to remind me of that.
And I think that maybe part of why people have that reaction when they see you doing the designs is because so much of the world, it's almost like how Susan Cain wrote Quiet, and it's, we're in the world of extroverts and introverts have value. I feel like we live in a world of J's, or the world wants us to be the inch wide, mile deep. And so therefore, when they see you doing some sort of sketch, they think that that's what you're proposing, when to you, it's actually just, this is part of the process. This is a guideline.
And also it's fun. Like, you get to dabble in a lot of different things, right? So for me, if I have to come into an office every day and I think only about like spreadsheets and my business, that would drive me nuts.
Yeah.
I want to have an aspect of, hey, I get to design or I get to advertise. Like, that's why I like what I do.
And I find you have to be comfortable with what others might see as waste, where, like, tearing down that part of the restaurant where people see that as waste. But if you can approach from the beginning the process as there's going to be pieces that we do and that maybe they don't work and we throw them away and kill them mercilessly.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know if this is true, but someone told me once that, like, your first day of school at architecture school, they tell you that every single building is going to be destroyed that you ever design. Like, you need to design it to be gone, not just built. And that's an interesting concept to me. Like, save for like the pyramids, which those guys really outshone themselves there, because someone decided that stuff's still hanging. Everything else comes down. Whenever I live in a historically cool old house in Chicago, and I feel like a sense of responsibility to it because of that. At the same time, I'm not going to be there forever, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up soon here, but I want to get into an area that actually this is a risk. This might just make none of my listeners interested, and this might also get you going for the next hour or so. But golf.
Golf.
I love golf. It's funny, you were talking about, I'll say more about myself than I probably should, but you were talking about talents and such, I wanted to be a professional golfer.
Wow.
So
Nice.
bad. And I worked extremely hard at it. And I was not that good.
What's the lowest index you got down to?
The lowest handicap I got down to was maybe like an 8 or a 9. I shot 76 once, and I would consistently shoot in the low 80s.
Yeah.
Now, I stopped playing entirely like 15 years ago. So I fantasize about doing a project because I feel like it's been proven that I have no talent in golf.
Well, a guy did this. He did 10,000 hours of golf
But
study.
he was a beginner, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he's talented.
So I grew up near a muni golf course. Neither of my parents played. They looked at it like a bourgeois sport. And there's some
people have that.
Right. And there's a lot of baggage with the game.
Yes.
And it's slow to watch on TV and all that sort of stuff.
Unless you
and people who play it are annoying and passionate. It's like, it's just all the bad stuff. I'll tell you what's amazing about golf. If you're not a golfer and you're listening, this is the thing to hang around for. Imagine you're 2 football fields away from something that's 4.5 inches around. The wind's blowing, you're in a beautiful setting, and someone hands you a stick and says, go ahead and hit this 2 football fields and put it near there.
In this hole that's 4 inches.
4 inches wide. You're going to fail at that most of the time. But eventually, once in a while, you will hit something glorious and it'll catch the wind just right. And everything that you imagined in your head will happen. And this thing will sit softly about 3 feet away from something 2 football fields away. Action at a distance is something that humans love. That's why people like to shoot guns at clays. That's why we like to throw stones. That's why we like to fish. Action at a distance is really cool. There is no greater action at a distance in my life than hitting a golf ball really well. And man, it's exciting. And when you see other people doing it consistently, and if you've done it ever, you just go, Jesus Christ, I can't believe they can do that. I played with a guy about 8 weeks ago. I'm a 4 index. So I shoot high 70s. Occasionally I've shot 2 rounds in the 60s my entire life. This guy's the 122nd, 5th golfer in the world or something like that. Plays on the European Tour. And on the first 9 holes, I made every putt, and I shot 35, and he shot 36.
Wow. So it can happen.
Well, so it can happen, but here's what happened on the back 9. I kind of looked at him, and through 12 holes, I held the tee box. 12 straight holes. Guy's 125th in the world. I've known him for a long time. And I looked at him, and I'm like, today's the day. Today's the day. I'm going to beat this guy. I'm going to beat the 125th ranked golfer. As soon as that thought crept into my head, my wheels fell off and he made 5 birdies. Whoa. So what happens on the back 9 is he shoots 65. I revert to 42. I shoot 77 right at my average.
Wait, so he shot 35.
He shot 30. I shot 35. He shot 36. He shot 31. So yeah, he shot like 67, something like that. It didn't even matter because my brain had melted at that point. But the point is that that's what happens with decision making and reversion to mean. Like, that is everything you need to know about every sport and life and business and all of that. You can't imagine how much better. I've shot even par. That won't get you squat in golf world.
Yeah.
You need to average 5 or 6 shots better than par on the hardest golf courses in the world.
This is why I'm currently fascinated with it, because I haven't played avidly for 15 years now.
Yeah.
But I've learned so much about my own psychology, about statistical analysis, about decision making.
You want to talk about meditative thing? Like, you need to be non-outcome based on a golf course. Like, you hit a bad shot, you got to pretend that you just found a golf ball in a tree or a bush and you got to hit it out. Like, you can't be racking your brain about what just happened. As I get older, I'm able to take that farther.
Yeah.
But every now and then you meet a 20-year-old who's got that shit together right from the start. And you're like, how did you get there? Like, when I was 20, there's no way I hit the ball better when I was 20. I am a much more sane golfer with much worse talents now.
Yeah.
Which means I shoot exactly the same thing. But man, I love that. And I love being around. I've gotten to play with Greg Norman at the Shark Shootout in front of 15,000 people. Like, that was like, those kind of experiences are super challenging. I don't get nervous. Like, you put a microphone in front of me and put me up in front of 10,000 people. I'll get a little bit of stage fright, but I'll be fine. You put a golf club in my hand, which I've done a million times in front of 10,000 people, and you're just like, oh my God, I can't even see.
If there's a person next to me at the driving range, I can't.
Right.
I suddenly can't hit.
I comported myself very well. I was really proud of myself, but it took like 5 or 6 holes for me to even realize I was breathing.
Well, the reason why I feel like it's relevant even to this conversation, though, is I mean, are you familiar with strokes gained?
Yes.
And read
all the
every
stats.
shot counts and sort of this path dependency that I don't know if that's the right word for it, but that, your shot goes here and that's going to have this effect on any downstream decisions that you make. And I'm not just mental game aside, simple randomness is going to affect your
The
score.
cool part about golf is it's a game of abject failure. If you go to like the best golfers in the world and you're like, how many great shots did you hit today? They'll say like 1. The rest is minimizing the variance and being smart and knowing your way around. Like when people say like they know their way around a golf course or they have golf smarts or intelligence, that's about planning. And you'd be like, how do you, if you don't play the game, you're like, how do you plan? It just looks like avoid the sand traps, but it's angles and all that stuff. And
you're aiming, instead of aiming a rifle, you're aiming a shotgun. That 2% of the time, your ball is going to go 30 yards left. 2% of the time, it's going to go 30 yards right.
What's really amazing to me is how, when you do get to play with professional golfers, how weirdly, with a couple exceptions, unimpressive it is. Like, sure, they hit the ball 20, 30 yards farther than me. I expected that. They're athletes. I'm just a 52-year-old dude. But it's not that much farther, and it doesn't look that much better. And by the way, we're both on the green in 2, and we're both 15 feet away. Like, I think I can hang here. And what you don't realize is that that's not the game. That's the minimum requirement to get involved.
Yeah.
And then the game is, how do you do that every time to minimize that quarter stroke a hole, which over the course of 72 hole tournament is,
if you're pro, quarter stroke around,
massive
is huge.
And you watch these guys wrestle with that. Like there's guys I'm friends with that are wrestling with the difference between a 71 stroke average and a 71 and a quarter, and that's $500,000 a year to them. I
feel like there's something to be learned there about perceptual biases. And it reminds me of one of the things that I learned recently, which was that putting is supposedly, the popular wisdom has been that putting and putt for dough, right? But it turns out that putting is actually not that important to the game. And part of the reason I believe that we think that is because that's where the ball goes in the hole. And
it's also like X number of your stroke. Like if you average 2 putts a hole, that's 36. That's half a par.
Right. It's half of your strokes, but the number of strokes that you can actually take off of it is
affected by your driver, which is why these guys bomb the ball now.
Well, but it's also limited, the number of strokes that you can take off. So I feel like there's something there to be learned in life or business about how we can perceive things to be one way when they're actually another.
Yeah. And also for me, it's a matter of like the days where I show up happy to be there, I do a lot better. And that's equally true in this office as it is on a golf course. Like if I'm happy to be there and I feel fortunate to be there, I perform a hell of a lot better all the way around. I think that's true everywhere, but it's magnified on a golf course, which is why I still do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you
so much for having me. Yeah.
Taking the time and having me.
And now
here
I got to get to Columbia.
Please come.
There's some great culinary conferences down there that we're considering going to. So I want to go.
Okay. We can go to El Cielo. That's a good place in Medellin.
Yes. Great.
Carmen.
There's a bunch down there, and there's a burgeoning culinary scene down there. So
Nick Kokonas, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nick Kokonas. Get more of Nick on Twitter at Nick Kokonas. He's a fascinating person to follow. And thank you to everyone who shared Love Your Work on social media. On Instagram, thank you to Book Notes 101, not for sharing Love Your Work, but for doing a giveaway of The Heart to Start. I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. And go follow Book Notes 101 for some more giveaways. Thank you also to Chara Selik, 5 Wisdoms Project, Nona Sovin, and of course, Tom Jepson Creative, who's always sharing the show on Instagram. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And on Twitter, thank you to Harley Christensen, Caleb Fong, Palace Schmidt, Louis Sbato, and Camby Haywood. And the update of the month goes to Cornelius Van Lit OP at LWCVL on Twitter, who shared the very special 200th episode of the podcast and said, "It was like @Cadavy interviewed himself and became one of my favorite guests so far. If you haven't listened to this podcast, this episode is the one to start with, @Love Your Work." Thank you so much for that, Cornelius. I really am proud of the 200th episode, and I appreciate you sharing that. How do you feel on Monday morning? Are you geared up and excited about the week ahead, or are you struggling to get started? Either way, how would you like to start off your week with a dose of inspiration? I've collected more than 15,000 highlights studying the lives of history's greatest creators, and each Monday in my Love Mondays newsletter, I share the very best nuggets of wisdom I've found. Sign up at kdv.co/Mondays. That's kdv.co/Mondays. At the core of being able to love your work is one question. Where does the money come from? Does the work you do make humanity better? Do the products you use help you grow as a person? That's why supporting Love Your Work on Patreon is good for all of us. I can focus on making a great show so you can become a better human. It's an honest exchange, value for value. This show costs hundreds of dollars a month to produce and bring to your ears. I invest my time and creative energy in making it, so I can't keep this show going without your support. Please support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/Cadavy. Think of it like a coffee meeting. Is this show worth buying me a coffee a month? Head to patreon.com/Cadavy to join. You'll get perks such as early access to ad-free content, masterclasses, or office hours directly with me. That's patreon.com/Cadavy, or Overcast users, just tap on the $sign. Love Your Work is brought to you in part by our top Patreon supporters, such as Jeffrey Mason. The theme music for Love Your Work is At Sea by Dorena from the album About Everything and More, by arrangement with Deep Elm Records at deepelm.com. Love Your Work is a production of Cadavy, Inc.